Have you ever been reading a book and you read a piece of dialogue that sounds so unlike something that an actual person would say that it completely pulls you out of the story? In this video, I'm gonna break down a bunch of mistakes that people can make when writing dialogue and offer solutions for how to fix them, in the hopes that this can help you write more effective dialogue in your fiction. Some rules for dialogue, just right off the bat, is that you want your dialogue to sound conversational. You want it to sound like something a person would actually say. People speak in a certain way, and how different people speak differs from person to person, but in general, people don't usually speak in full sentences, or people talk over each other and people cut each other off. So I'm going to share with you some strategies that I use to try to keep my dialogue natural. The second big rule when it comes to dialogue is you want your dialogue to move your story forward or deliver pleasure to your reader. A lot of readers, myself included, absolutely love reading banter, and the banter doesn't always move the story forward, but the quippy kind of responses and witty remarks can be really funny and just enjoyable to read and add to the pleasure of the reading experience. So either your dialogue has to function in that way to deliver pleasure, or it has to function to propel your story in some way. So the mistakes that I talk about today are things that people do that go against these two rules, and then the fixes that I offer, or the suggestions that I offer, will be things that will help get you closer to those rules. But that is the vision that you should have in mind when writing dialogue. That is the purpose that dialogue serves in your story. And by move the story forward, I'm talking about both in a character way and a plot way. Like, dialogue reveals character, that counts as moving the story forward, or it moves the plot forward and reveals something about the plot. So with that being said, the first major mistake that people make with dialogue is they use dialogue for obvious exposition. Exposition is the insertion of background information into your story, whether that is character information, world building information, anything that you want readers to know to understand your story, that is exposition. You always can tell when a writer has shoved a bunch of obvious exposition into writing, because a conversation between characters would look something like a line like, "Don't you remember? We have dinner with your sister tonight, and I don't want to go because I've always hated your sister ever since that one time she called my dress ill-fitting nearly 20 years ago." Or when talking about a character's father, another one says, "Your father, the king, who I really hate," and then continues on. You've probably experienced this before in movies, because this is a really big thing in screenwriting. In screenwriting, you don't have characters' interiority to establish the world and establish your exposition, and so you have to rely on either like visual cues or dialogue. And so in a lot of beginner screenplays, you have a lot of dialogue that sounds like this. And I completely understand the urge, because it's tricky to establish exposition in a subtle way. It's a lot easier just to info dump and just give it all to the readers up front, but it's very awkward to read because nobody talks like this in real life. If my brother and I were late for a dinner, I wouldn't go to him and say, "Hi, my brother, who I am particularly close with, even though growing up we used to throw chairs at each other because we were 4 years apart and had very different interests. Are you ready to go to the dinner hosted by my uncle, who is estranged and who I have not seen in over 30 years? I would just say, "Hey, are you ready to go to dinner?" You need to learn to incorporate exposition in different ways, rely on very subtle cues, and not over-explain things to your readers. You would be surprised how smart your readers are and how they will be able to pick up on very subtle things. You don't need to spell everything out for them. The second big dialogue mistake that many writers make is characters saying exactly what they feel. Obviously, this is not an always or never piece of advice. You can have characters say exactly how they feel, and there is a place for that in character storytelling. However, usually it is stronger to have characters not say exactly what they're feeling and show it through the dialogue instead. Instead of a character saying, "I'm so mad at you," find a way to show that anger through their word choice and how they say it. Maybe your characters are in an argument, and instead of one character saying, "I'm so mad at you right now," they say, one character insults them or says something kind of harsh, and that other character recoils and is like, "Wow, is that what we're going with?" That shows the anger more than just telling the anger, and it makes the scene more interesting. A lot of characters don't naturally say what they feel, especially if they grew up not expressing their emotions, or they are bound up in some way and don't know how to put all of their feelings into words. It's actually pretty rare, even for people, to go around saying exactly what they feel. Like, if I'm upset with someone, usually I won't just say, "I'm mad at you." Or maybe I will in a frustrated way if I've been pushed and pushed and pushed by someone who knows something is wrong and I've been avoidant and not been saying what I feel, and then eventually really frustratedly, I just say, I'm mad right now. The way to fix this is by relying more on subtext. Let characters imply what they're feeling and show what the characters are feeling through action tags, which are sentences that go in between dialogue tags explaining what a character is doing, how they're moving around the space, what their body language is like, or how a character is feeling. Show it through dialogue tags, which is like she said or he said. Sidebar, dialogue tags are usually not the best place to show emotion, in my opinion, because people usually fall into the trap of telling emotions in dialogue tags or using very forceful dialogue tags too much. It's very common for people to slap adverbs onto the end of dialogue tags to try and show emotion. So if someone says like, she said angrily, that's just a quick emotion tell, and it's far stronger to show through the word choice whether a character is angry or not. It's also easy to fall into the trap of using one too many complicated dialogue tags one after the other, like, you know, guffawed or I don't know, I can't think of them off the top of my head because I don't really use too many complicated dialogue tags, but muttered, things like bellowed. If you have those one after the other, they can lose a lot of their punch and kind of make the writing feel clunky. So dialogue tag's not the best place to tell emotion, but it is a place that you can selectively use as a tool in your toolbox. And then also your word choice. If you want a character to be frustrated, have them use shorter sentences, have them pick more forceful words. Have them avoid saying exactly what they mean in order for the scene to be more interesting. The third common dialogue mistake is that all characters will sound the same. This is a common pitfall that beginner writers fall into, where every single character sounds like the author. They don't sound different from each other, so it's not immediately clear who's talking when reading the conversations unless you have dialogue tags. All of the dialogue kind of swims together. If you observe people talking, or movie characters talking, or people having dialogue in books, everybody speaks in a slightly different way. People choose different words depending on their upbringing, depending on their preference, depending on their levels of education, depending on their friends and family, depending on whether or not they spend a ton of time on the internet or not, whether or not they grew up in a multilingual household. People have different vocabularies and phrases that they like to use and sentence structures that they default to and ways of speaking. And it's important when you're writing a cast of characters, especially when you're writing a big cast where a lot of people are talking, to get very specific about how those characters speak so it's very clear who's speaking when. You want it to be clear enough that when you don't have dialogue tags, readers can pretty much follow who's talking and when just based off of the differentiation of the voices. So I just pulled an example from my book, The Love Trials. I tried to find a scene where all of the team members were talking, but I couldn't, and this is just the best that I could find to illustrate my point. I have 4 characters speaking in this short exchange, and I mean really mostly 3 characters, and each of them has slightly different cadences and ways that they speak. So one of them is more of like an easygoing kind of golden retriever type extrovert who's always making jokes to everyone about everything. One of them is like a very grumpy kind of closed off girl that like makes threats to her friends all the time and like kind of almost pretends to hate everybody but really would do absolutely anything for them. And one of them is incredibly intelligent and is always like spitting facts about random things and just has more of an academic way of speaking. This is just to give you an example of how to make the characters' voices different, and just to show how like I do this when I'm working on my books, is just trying to figure out word choices and cadence choices and things like that when attributing those to each different character, just to make sure that they sound different. I wouldn't want Benji to sound like Griffin. Like that would feel really wrong when I'm writing if Benji started talking like Griffin or the other way around. I've made a couple of videos on this channel talking about character voice that I can link in the description of this video. Nailing down character voice is incredibly important and a great writing exercise. I improved so much as a writer when I started really paying attention to voice and trying to figure out how to make my characters sound different. The next common dialogue mistake that I see quite often is dialogue being too stiff. This kind of piggybacks off of the last one, but often I see a lot of dialogue, like people talking or characters talking in full sentences with absolutely perfect grammar and punctuation, and people People usually don't speak like that in real life. Dialogue is not supposed to sound exactly like real life speech. That is something I learned in college. I had a professor say that to me and it really stuck with me. It's supposed to sound enough like real life speech that people believe it's real life speech, but it has to be very specifically chosen to either reveal character or move the story forward. If people talked like they did in real life in books, you would have pages and pages and pages of nonsense because people talk a lot, and usually the conversations are not as succinct as they need to be in our stories. So we want to mimic human speech patterns in order to have readers buy in to the fact that this is actually a conversation that they're listening in on, but not go in and write a bunch of ums and likes and you knows and pauses and I lost my train of thoughts and things like that that often occur in real life speech. So in addition to creating character voices that are very unique for each of your characters, the way to fix this is by really leaning into sentence fragments and letting characters ramble a little bit and then cut themselves off. In moderation, because remember, we're not trying to do giant paragraphs of like absolute word vomit like people do in real life. You want them to talk over each other. You want them to interrupt each other. One thing that helps me is reading my dialogue out loud and seeing how it actually sounds to say. If it totally rolls off the tongue, that is a sign that things are more naturally written. But if it feels very clunky, like all of a sudden there's a giant stick up all of my characters' butts and they're all standing here like this, like having a very stiff conversation, then I know I have to loosen it up a little bit, but in accordance to their voice. Some characters speak like that on purpose, but I always like to do that as a choice. I kind of jumped the gun on talking about dialogue tags. When I wrote my notes for this video, I had a whole section planned on dialogue tags, but I already kind of gave it to you in an earlier tip. A common dialogue mistake is making your dialogue tags overly complicated, either using very complicated actual tags like he exclaimed, he uttered, and things like that, or overusing adverbs and always saying like he said loudly, he said gently on every single dialogue tag, or relying too heavily on action tags to describe what's happening in a scene, so having really, really long melodramatic action tags. It's best practice to try to show emotion and exposition and all of that stuff in the actual lines of dialogue itself, and try to have your dialogue tags blend into the background and your action tags all be there for a reason. Don't put too many action tags in there. Put enough to set the scene, but if you put too many in there, it can start getting clunky. I don't necessarily know where this line is. Oftentimes I just do what feels right to me, and then when I'm in the beta reading stage and my editing stage, I'll like very deliberately cut them out or put action tags in or change them around and things like that. But when you're writing, just try not to over rely on them. I'm a strong believer that said is the best dialogue tag, and that every single adverb that you would put into a dialogue tag can be better replaced by a strong verb. Instead of she said loudly, say she yelled, or even better, show through the actual dialogue of what she's saying that she's angry and speaking loudly. Use very strong words and then say like her voice rises, and then have another set of very strong words to show that that character is shouting. Another common dialogue mistake that I often see is dialogue that goes absolutely nowhere. If you remember those two rules that I gave you right at the top of this video about what dialogue has to do and what purpose it serves in your story, this is dialogue that doesn't fit either of those rules. Dialogue that doesn't show character, does not move the story forward, and is not entertaining to read. If a character has a really long argument, you don't need to show the entire argument. You just need to show the important part of the argument that actually changes something in either the character or in the story. But even if the purpose of that dialogue is not to move the story forward or reveal character, it's important to know how much is too much and where to draw the line. Everybody always loves to say show, don't tell, but telling is important in storytelling and exists for a reason. You don't need to show your character waking up in the morning every single day and brushing their teeth every single day and following every single little minute of their entire day with them every single day. Not every conversation that your character has in a particular day is going to make it into your book. That would be an incredibly boring book. So use dialogue within your scenes when it's important, but make sure that you're not dragging on and having your characters discuss superfluous things that are not doing one of the things that we said that dialogue has to do. So to recap, this is all the stuff that we talked about. Don't use dialogue for exposition. Don't shove unnecessary exposition into your dialogue. Don't have your characters say exactly what they're feeling or what they're meaning all the time. Make sure that you're using subtext. Really dig into the individual voices of your characters. Keep your dialogue and action tags as simple as you possibly can. Said is definitely my favorite one. Cut adverbs where you can and replace them with strong verbs. Only include dialogue in important moments where it is showing something interesting interesting and not just acting as filler, and lean into things like sentence fragments and interruptions and normal speech patterns of people without including things like and that are indicative of real life speech. If you have a question about dialogue, please feel free to ask it in the comment section and I will do my best to answer it. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that it was helpful to you. If you have a second, I'd be super grateful if you could like this video and also subscribe to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze and I'm an award-winning author who makes weekly videos sharing actionable writing tips that helps me make my own writing better. I'm the author of The Love Trials, which is my book that just came out. It's about a serial killer who takes couples and makes them play games like in Saw designed to break their love, only he messes up and takes a pair of enemies instead. I also have a published 5-book paranormal thriller series. The Love Trials has a paranormal element too. It's like Criminal Minds meets Saw meets Supernatural. I have another published 5-book completed series that is more like Stranger Things meets Fear Street, and that's called They Stay, and that is also out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week, everybody, and as always, happy writing.